First off, I watched the movie with my whole family, from a 6-year-old to me in my 40s. Everyone had a great time with it. So
yes,
thank you so much for being a part of making this film that brought joy into my family.
It's an honor.
First thing I want to ask you about, the movie was over 20 years in the making. When did you join the process?
So I remember Shannon Tindle, the director and writer, talking to me about a very different version of the same, what turned into Ultraman Rising back when it was called Made in Japan. It was at a different studio. It was a similar concept, but it was based on, it was inspired by Ultraman, but was not an Ultraman property. That project fell through, but I was starting to get really excited about it. And then amazingly, somehow the way these things happen is that script got in the hands of Tsuburaya and then Netflix, and all of a sudden it became, instead of doing a derivative movie or an homage, you do the real thing. And so I was brought on to work on the project. It was about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. It was end of February 2020. And if you know anything about how composers usually get involved in films, it's kind of the last person to get brought in. So getting involved 4 years in advance was a pretty amazing opportunity. Shannon and I had worked on a couple of projects together already, so I was very fortunate to already be close with him and his producer Tom Knott. So yeah, it happened quite a long time ago.
And when you started writing, what were you working from? Was it the script, conversations? What did that look like?
So amazingly, Shannon is a really great writer, and he writes sound into the script and often music as well. So I was looking at the script, and I was looking at the concept art that turned into this poster right behind me by our art director, Sunmin In. It looks very much like what you're seeing right there, but it was a little bit more sort of dazzling and mind-blowing. So I had the script. I had a storyboard by the co-director John Aoshima of one scene, and I had this art, and I started just writing themes. And at least 3 or 4 of the compositions that are still in the film today, I composed like way before animation even began. So it was an interesting process to jump in that early.
So with the film, part of what makes the score for it so cool is it's pulling from all these different places where it's heroic, it's tragic, it's 8-bit video game sounds, it's electric guitars. Where did that idea come from to have all these eclectic set of ideas brought together for something that feels so harmonious?
So before I even began thinking about what instruments I wanted to be using to tell my version of the story, Shannon had already pitched a bunch of music ideas, because he's just, he's a big idea guy, and he's pitching things, and he has great ideas. So by the time I started thinking about it, he had already pitched the idea of orchestra meets 8-bit sort of video game console, which of course is like right up my alley. I love the idea. And then eventually we're constantly sending stupid texts between each other, as old friends do. And I would say 90% of it is unshareable. A small portion of it is just these wonderful ideas where I don't remember where it began. But he also fell in love with the polyphia guitar god, in particular for me, Tim Henson, because he made the guitar sound like a modern instrument. I had no interest in putting electric guitar into the score, even though I'm an electric guitarist. I wasn't really thinking that way. But as soon as I heard Tim Henson play guitar, I was like, he sounds like a superhero.
Yeah.
Perfect. It sounds modern. It does not sound like a sort of a shredder from the 70s. It's not blues based. It's it's something really new. So it was actually it was kind of insane. There was an impossible diversity of musical elements to pull in, and then I really wanted to pull in Japanese percussionists. I wanted to pull in an amazing orchestra, and because it's a story about family, it's actually quite, I mean, it's inspired by Kramer versus Kramer. For a big superhero action movie. I think that surprises a lot of people, but if you watch it again, which you should, it's really a story about fathers and sons and daughters and mothers, and it's about parenting. And I needed an instrument that really pulled it all together from all of these crazy, epic, nutty, massive, action-packed sounds. I needed something that brought it back to like an emotional core. And it was actually the harp, because it tells such an intimate story in such a loving and affectionate way. It really has that feeling to it, but also by adjusting the playing technique, a harpist can play like this traditionally, but if they play a little bit closer, it's called près de la table, PDLT, which is where they just put their fingers closer to the frame of the harp, either above or below, and it starts to sound like a Japanese koto. And that was something I really enjoyed playing with, having this surprisingly intimate, beautiful, loving, kind of family-oriented sound of a harp that was mixing between sort of modern Western sounds and Japanese sounds all throughout the score. So that's kind of how I brought it all together.
That's what the movie does so well, is pull so many things together, and it feels cohesive. So very well done. Thank you.
Just a last thing is another thing is that we wanted to bring the original theme of Ultraman into the score. So that was yet another thing, is like, you know, the legacy of it,
Right.
and looking back on 60 plus years of history there.